overview of the global context of asylum, and then was going to sort of come in and talk about it from the point of view of what people seeking asylum actually want people to be doing in order for it to get better and in order for it to change and become something that is not the terrible problems that people are facing at this time. And personally, I'm most interested in the conversation and the discussion and the planning that we have coming forward, so I'm going to try and be as brief as I can. So I just want to start off by talking a little bit about the push, what we would call the push factors. Why do people end up leaving the place that they know, the people that they know, the language that they speak, the food that they eat, the weather that they experience? Why do people leave their familiar places to end up coming to a place like Manchester? And there was an important piece of work that was done by Stephen Castles and people down at Oxford in 2002 that made it quite explicit that whether you talk about somebody, and there's kind of two basic ways, isn't it? There's two kind of divisions going on around the people who are in these positions of great movement. They're either people who are asylum seekers, refugee people seeking asylum, or they are what they would call economic migrants. Now, what the Castles work showed was that the push factors at the back of these people, whether they are being defined in this country as people seeking asylum or as economic migrants, are the same. They are the same push factors, and we need to keep that very much clearly in our minds. So by that I mean, people are coming from situations of civil war. They're coming from situations where there's underdeveloped infrastructure. There's underdeveloped infrastructure because there's a history of colonialism or imperialism, followed by a history of a failure to deliver on the part of the West in terms of the promises it made to those countries around what would change at the point of independence and the role of the West in relation to them. So just fact number one in this, the push factors are fundamentally the same. Whether somebody is arguing with you on the basis that these people are seeking asylum, or they're arguing with you on the basis that most of these people are economic migrants, the reasons people take those moves in the first place are fundamentally the same. Fact number two, or area number two, that is absolutely fundamental to this whole question of asylum is the role of the arms trade. Jonathan Neal just talked about £1.3 trillion being spent annually on arms. £1.3 trillion being spent annually on arms in the world. The UK is the world's second largest arms exporting country. That's according to a report to the American Congress in 2003. The UK is the second largest arms exporting country. But supposedly since 1997, the UK has not been selling arms to countries where the presence of arms could fuel conflict. That's the theory. In practice, they've modified legislation and they've actually broken down the arms industry so that it's legal to sell the component. So you don't sell the gun, you don't sell the bomb, you sell that bit of the gun over there and that bit of the bomb over here. So they're selling arms not as whole pieces but in component forms that then get reassembled into whole pieces. And this is on the basis of a study that was commissioned and published in 2004 by Oxfam. So the UK is actually a key supplier of arms components in the world. And then between 1998 and 2002, the number of arms components licensed for sale increased to the power of 11, increased 11-fold. And the number of assault rifle components has increased 4-fold. That's just in that 4-year period. And perhaps not surprisingly, or indeed not surprisingly, we have a situation of deteriorating conflict situations. Crisis Watch in August identified that there were 11 conflict situations in the world that they were defining in that month as in a deteriorating condition. So let's move away then. Push factors, arms trade. Is it coming in? Push factors, arms trade. I want to move on now quickly to requests for asylum in the West, which have fallen by 1/5 in the West compared to a year ago. However, in the last year, there's been a 31% increase in requests from Iraq, which number 5,700, a 20% increase in requests from Haiti, and that's from a United Nations report published in September. And the United Nations High Commission for Refugees describes those increases in those areas as explicitly deriving from a lack of security in these countries. So we went into Iraq in 2003 in the name of security, and in 2005 the place where the more people are coming or trying to come from than anywhere else is Iraq. This is the contradictions of the system, this is the craziness and the madness of the system that we're in. Okay. According to the UNHCR, of 24 of the countries of the European Union, and this is excluding Italy, the requests are down 17% compared to a year ago, and down 30% compared to 2 years ago. France is the single largest destination worldwide, the US second, Britain, and then Germany. But the lead country of origin into European states is Serbia and Montenegro, which is including the state Kosovo, and then China, and then Russia, including Chechnya. So these are the actual facts. That's not coming from people like us on the left, that's coming from the system around the movement of people, the reasons for the movement of people, the role of the arms trade inside of those situations, and what's actually happening at this end. Now, Akila will speak more deeply about what it is that people seeking asylum, some of the things that people seeking asylum want to see happening in this country in order for us to make sure that the dehumanisation process that we have been experiencing stops. But I just want to remind us all that you know, in the last few years there's been 33 suicides in detention in this country. And there are countless people, and I suspect, just on the basis of my work, I would say it's over 100,000. And the government is very wary about describing how many it is, but countless people who have ended up having to go underground in this country because they've been failed by the system and they have nowhere to go. And that is including of children. So when we talk about human rights and when we talk about children's rights, these are the facts that we need to be very, very clear about and very forceful about when we talk with people about the way forward on the issue. And in terms of the destitution issue, I'm very, very happy to see that a conference has been called in Manchester on December the 3rd by Church Action on Poverty and another church-based organisation on destitution. And I think it's really important that there's a movement forwards for that and in support of that and an opening out, and that the faith-based communities, that's obviously coming from the Church of England and Christian-based communities, but there's an opening out to the imams, there's an opening out to the synagogues and to the agnostics too. So there's roles for everybody there. And then of course there's Section 9. It's important, and we've brought these in, Section 9, which people here may or may not know, but it's the latest piece of legislation where they're separating the child from the parent in the name of making people agree to return or come out of the asylum system. And that is being mobilised for in Manchester on the 19th of November, where the young people themselves who are on this receiving end and are historically voiceless inside of that situation are going to take the lead and come to the fore. Now, in terms of what's going on under Section 9, in terms of the violations that are taking place, people involved in the asylum system are now describing the behaviour of officials that are implementing the asylum and immigration legislation as being equivalent to the Nazi political police force, the Gestapo, where you have people at dawn raiding houses, clad from head to foot in black, in riot gear, handcuffing parents and arresting children. This is what's happening in this country now in our name. Okay. And fortunately, these violations of human rights do breed resistance. And they do breed situations like this, where we've got this conference happening today and we're here in this room to talk about what we're going to do about those resistances. Because briefly it came through from the main meeting about the way in which people seeking asylum have been dehumanised, and the way in which that process of dehumanisation that's gone on over a period of years has now been capitalised upon in order to move us through into the demonisation of Muslim people. But what they never do inside of this, they construct the person seeking asylum as a scrounger, they construct them as a drain on the resources. You can't get a hospital bed, it's because of asylum seekers. You can't get a place in school because of asylum seekers. You can't get the council to come and mend your front gate because people seeking asylum are living down the road and that all the money's going in that direction. And what they're not talking about inside of this, and this is what we need to make sure gets connected up, is the reality around the spending programs that are going on. They're not talking at all about the role of the multinationals inside of the squeezing out of ordinary people in this country and around the world. They're not talking about the £270 billion of tax avoidance that is recorded as taking place on an annual basis by multinationals around the world. £270 billion. An article in the September Guardian from Campbell talked about offshore companies being formed at a rate of 150,000 per year. That there were 25 tax havens in 1970 compared to 63 now. And half of the tax havens that now exist were former British protectorates or colonies. So the history of imperialism and the role of that imperialism inside of the presence of people here runs very, very deep inside of the management of the economic processes that are going on inside of global capitalism today. They're estimating that there's between 45 and 150 billion pounds per annum tax avoidance in Britain alone. And then Mr. Christensen, the former economic advisor to the Jersey government, who also worked at the Department of Overseas Development and with Oxfam, has been reported as saying, these tax havens are locked into desperate competition. They like to suggest that they oil the wheels of global capital, but there is no case for that. What has happened is that tax havens transfer the burden of tax away from capital and towards labour and the consumer. And inside of the issue to do with asylum, we must be very bold about drawing the links between the reality of what's happening on the ground and the reality of the way in which multinational capital is operating at the international level and making those excuses for the human rights violations on the ground. So the resistance has to be bound up with a command of the facts and the ability to communicate those facts. Because post-7/7, post-July the 7th bombings, this right in this country, as we've heard about already, is being violated in very fundamental and important ways. I said in that meeting, the headline express, bombers were all sponging asylum seekers. It says it all in terms of the nexus and the crossover in people's heads between the war on terror and the systems of asylum. Okay, but what does that historical coverage do? It does create a groundswell of support, or it's seeking to create a groundswell of support for exceptional powers to be used to combat these terror threats. And the shoot-to-kill policy, for example, has prompted the question, which I don't know the answer to. I don't believe the answer has been offered yet. When was it introduced? And why was there no debate in Parliament? At the same time, post-7/7, the proposal has come forward that internet sites and bookshops be shut down. Now, in the age of the internet, it's actually nonsense to talk about trying to stop the ban on free speech, because the technological advances are such that that's not viable. But the principle of shutting down bookshops, the principle of shutting down internet sites, where would that end? A little while ago, I was reading the book by Anatoly Babiar, which is about a massacre in Kiev by the Germans when they entered Kiev during the Second World War. And he's talking about his memory of his mum, talking to him when he was a child, and his mum saying to him, at the point where you hear anybody deciding or suggesting that the way forward is to start burning books, let that be your alarm bell, let that be the flare going up for you. And the flare has gone up. Okay. And just one other thing around that, which I didn't know about until very recently, and this is about the necessity for us to ensure that history does not repeat itself again. One of the groups that were targeted in the Holocaust were black people who'd come from the colonies of Africa and who ended up in the concentration camps of the Weimar Republic. So these historical phenomena can repeat, and what we've got to do is draw the lessons out of this history. 2 years ago, Labour cited the need to outright the right on the question of asylum and immigration within their party political positioning. That they needed to draw people away from the BNP, and therefore they had to be tough on asylum and they had to be tough on immigration in order to make sure that people were not attracted towards the BNP. Well, where is the BNP now? So what's the excuse? What's the account for their policy now? And how do we respond to the lawmaking that they are using to justify what they're doing to people seeking asylum? And I just want to finish with something that was said recently by Gratan Puxon, who is the chair of the European Roma Federation. And his talk is an obituary that he wrote about Simon Wiesenthal, who was a hunter of Nazi war criminals. And he says, his successors, this is Simon Wiesenthal's successors, say they will continue to investigate Nazi war crimes and have 380 suspects on their list. Never forgetting Simon Wiesenthal's example, he goes on to say, let us root out all those who today promote racial hatred and terror against other people, especially where their deeds are masked by the veil of law. For myself, he says, these are the murderers among us who need to be exposed. Okay, thanks.